Can we all agree that it's reasonable to have an expectation of a new Marvel Champion's identity's power level before we even gander at any reveals or unwrap any cellophane? And this is all based on what we think we know about them in comic book form. And for armchair fans like myself, what the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done to further muddy the waters. This is why I, Ben Jai, thought it would be fun to see who brings most to the table in terms of power in real life fiction. Not quite a who would win in a fight list, because you'd need more context than a human brain could comprehend to answer those questions, but this is as close as we can probably muster to providing a tier list for who's got the most superhero game. This group of names will include everyone from core set participants to the recently released Venom Hero Pack. And can you believe that brings us to a whopping 23 identities that we can get our greasy mitts on now. It's for this reason more than any other that I'll be keeping my 2 pennies worth to a minimum for each hero. And because I'm chronological like that, we'll be announcing the placements in release date order. Let the subjectivity and flaming begin. So Core Set brought us the precious bounty of 5 identities to chew on. In alphabetical order, that means that Black Panther is up first. And somewhat about middle-ish, he's getting slapped smack bang in C tier. Which right out the gate sets this rank as the norm for the peak of ordinary human capability. As the head of the Wakandan state, King T'Challa wields his heightened senses and fighting skills, alongside his vibranium-laced suit to treat lowly peasant villains with the disdain they so richly deserve. And after B comes C for Captain Marvel. And would you gosh darn believe it? Although she deserves her spot in A tier, she isn't the all-singing, all-dancing S tier superhero the MCU would have us believe she is. Still, the former test pilot who gets genetically spliced into a human Kree hybrid is still able to fly greater than the speed of sound and manipulate energy like a good 'un. So could probably fry a villainous egg or two given half the chance. And speaking of surprises, Mr. Iron Man is on par with old Carol, because despite being Z tier without access to his many Iron Man suits and that massive noggin, said pieces of armour have, it's fair to say, got a bit out of hand in comic book land over the years, including one imaginatively titled the Godbuster armour. In other words, given enough time, the man is a match for almost anyone. Up next is She-Hulk, also sitting pretty in the A tier. She wasn't always destined to be a superhero, but a blood transfusion from her cuz, the Bruce Banner, resulted in her being a slightly underpowered He-Hulk. Which is to say, she could still leave you in a state that even crazy glue couldn't bring you back from. We then leave Corset Town with Spider-Man. Ah, Spidey, you're not really man at all, are you? Which is probably why you've become the first resident of the D tier. You see, what you bring in terms of dexterity and all-round physical improvements, you can't exactly blag in equal measure life experience and combat training. And then comes the mighty Captain America, symbol of all that is pure and great, and an all-American hero to boot. That can still only bring the D game. Yep, he's a cool dude and easy to love, but there is a limit to the power of the Super Soldier Serum, and this is where it sits. Moving swiftly on, it turns out, rather unfortunately, that being a fangirl of your namesake captain inevitably sets you down a peg or two. Which is why Kamala Khan sits in the lowliest of tiers. Because polymorph or not, there is only so much kick-ass that she can bring in such illustrious company. Thor, on the other hand, does not have the same problem. Sitting at the tippy top tier of the S variety, what we know is this: The God of Thunder is bringing demigod-like powers and a super special magical hammer to smoosh even the most belligerent of scheming villains. This tier, suffice to say, is reserved for otherworldly powers, and Mr. Odinson certainly fits that bill. And as we continue to play the up and down like a yo-yo game, we can confidently say that Black Widow deserves to be one rung above the bottom because A, she has a sniff of the super soldier in her, B, has been combat and spy trained to within an inch of her life, and C, is not afraid to use any means at her disposal to get the job done. So from the all-physical skill set to the metaphysical, we plonk Doctor Strange in the sitting pretty A tier, because even as the Sorcerer Supreme, he still has his limits. Yes, he can draw on the powers of gods and has a very, very high ceiling. We're choosing to place him alongside the best version of Iron Man, because, well, Master Subjectivity said so. Which then brings us to the identity FFG clearly didn't know what to do with. The almighty and quite incredible Hulk, who bumps uglies with Thor in S tier, because, well, you make this guy angry enough, he's gonna mess you up. And by that I mean pulverise you until you wave goodbye to your friends. Like the Hulk rising from the ashes then, let's just take a moment to gaze awestruck at the sight of the big green at the top of a tier list for Marvel Champions, the card game. Such a shame. They say by the side of every good man is a good woman. Actually, this adage makes no sense because Spider-Woman is 2 tiers, count them 2 steps up the ladder from Peter Parker. And her origin story is really nothing whatsoever like New York's favourite wallcrawler. Because, well, Spider-Woman's powers were a slow burn, spending a decent chunk of time in stasis, the net result being that she is superior in almost every way to her salter namesake. Rise of the Red Skull also brought us Hawkeye, and although he plays better than he looks, unfortunately he is stuck on the bottom of this here list. Yes, he's an expert marksman and has a bunch of tricks up his sleeve and in his quiver, but he is a mere foot soldier in the ranks of his teammates. Marvel Team Up covers the next 4 entries, with Ant-Man sitting in average tier, by virtue in many ways of his utility, going full small or mighty big. Albeit only for a finite period, means he really is the Swiss Army knife of superheroes. Much like his Pym particle not-so-partner in crime, Wasp, who, depending on what version you're talking about, could be up, down, left or right of Scott Lang Ant-Man. So instead of getting creative, they sit here like 2 peas in a pod. We then have the yin and yang duo of Quicksilver, here ensconced in C tier just like our previous 2 entries, restricted by nothing other than being a bit of a one-trick pony. Don't get me wrong, that one trick is blink and you'll miss it tastic, and doesn't require a roid needle on tap, but it's still not enough to allow him to rise to the mighty ranks of the B tier Sister Maximoff Scarlet Witch. A complicated individual to say the least, it's also difficult to place magic wielders in this list. I suppose arguably with the right training and experience, the sky's the limit, but this spot feels about right for her. But then entered stage right the Guardians of the Galaxy with Groot. Most parts fauna and arguably the greatest actor the universe has ever seen, with the ability to convey so much using just 3 words. Why is this guy so high in B tier? Well, because he's almost but not like the Hulk if he were to be brown and look like a tree. So durable, some say that inside that costume is none other than Rocky Balboa on stilts. An accusation that would not be levelled on our Rocket Raccoon. No, this furry little wisecracking critter is clearly a vital member of the Guardians, but with a penchant for guns as big as him, he can still blast a perfectly round hole in you, even though he is scraping the barrel of this alphabet list. As is his buddy Guardian, Star-Lord. Another hero that's had his fair share of topsy-turvy changes, but I think his place in D tier is warranted. Yes, he might be favoured in a scrap with Little Rocket, but you did hear me say this wasn't a who would win list, right? Nonetheless, Gamora, who eats C tier for breakfast, would probably give both of them a lesson in involuntary crying. Because, well, she is the deadliest woman in the galaxy. Which is actually shorter to say than her full name. You ready? Gamora Zen Woberi Ben Titan. This is clearly why she's Gamora on both sides of her card. Propping up the rear of the GOG release schedule is our Drax. Clearly not the Destroyer, but his best self is definitely staying at the B-Star Hotel tonight. Possessing superhuman strength and fighting skills, and more than happy to give Thanos a fist and a bite until he goes bye-bye, this Guardian ain't no pushover. And then finally, almost as an afterthought, comes the Flash Thompson version of Venom. Spending his military career redeeming his questionable character and getting a lease of life after losing his legs by joining with the Venom symbiote, this is what happens when super soldiers mix with comparably more powerful aliens, and is why he puts a pin in today's list in B tier. And so there you have the definitive, I'm gonna get abused for this list, real life power ratings for all those Marvel Champions identities. Please do take some of this with a pinch of salt. If you thought it was next to impossible making pound for pound lists in combat sports, well, that can't hold a comic strip to the edutainment I just brought to your brainstem. This was fun. I may do it again. Keep it kind in the comments. Alas, I have been the voice of Benji, and this is him telling you that this video has ended.